Good afternoon. This presentation is titled People First Language. This is presented by Thomas Martin for the course EDL 853, and this is module number 10. I'd like to begin with the purpose of using People First language. The primary purpose of using People First language is to acknowledge that the individual is a person above anything else, and that includes the disability. Purposes for the term disability. The primary purpose is just for identification. Also determining necessary resources such as early interventions, Social Security resource needs, special education, 504 plan, etc. The term disability is never used to define the individual. Implications. Implications of disability first language. It's implying that all students sharing the disability are the same and exhibit the same symptoms and severity of those symptoms, and this is inaccurate. This is wrong. Implications of people first language are that students that share a disability may exhibit some similar symptoms, but variation does exist within those particular disabilities. Elaborating on the implications of disability first language. So discussing students with disabilities, when you're using disability first language such as autistic child, this is highlighting individual differences. So it's kind of closing the door to discovering similarities for students. When we are using people first language, that opens up the door for sharing various likes, hobbies, to promote establishing commonalities with peers and establishing those relationships. Focusing on individual differences fosters seclusion by reinforcing categorization as a means of separating rather than merely identifying, which is labeling's intended purpose, is to identify. Altering the language changes the perception. Inappropriate examples and appropriate alternatives. So the first inappropriate example is autistic kid. An appropriate alternative to that would be a student with autism spectrum disorder. An inappropriate example is intellectual disability classroom. An appropriate alternative is a classroom for students with an intellectual disability. Inappropriate example, special education kids. An appropriate alternative to that would be kids receiving special education services. Inappropriate example, deaf kid with a hearing aid. An appropriate alternative would be student who is hard of hearing. Now I'm going to briefly discuss the evolution of qualitative descriptors. Many derogatory terms used today were once qualitative descriptors of intelligence quotient ranges. So just to elaborate on that, mental retardation was a qualitative descriptive term referencing IQ ranges from 0 to 70. An idiot was a descriptive term used for individuals with IQ ranging from 0 to 25. An imbecile was a descriptive term for IQs ranging from 26 to 50, and moron was the descriptive term for IQs ranging from 51 to 70. Evolution of those qualitative descriptors. Once society adopts the terms to be used offensively, the psychological community drops the terms as acceptable descriptors or psychological jargon. So basically, once those terms have been used frequently enough that they are kind of common terms within the society and begin adopting offensive meaning behind them, then they're no longer utilized by the psychological community. For example, mental retardation is now referred to as an intellectual disability, and that's just due to the abuse of the term retardation. Effects of labels in the school setting. So labels do have both positive and negative effects in the school setting. Some of the positive effects are that it provides an understanding of how a disability adversely affects a student's progress within the general education curriculum. This understanding of how a disability can affect someone's progress can be used to develop services that the student may need in order to be successful in school. It can also be used to reduce symptoms, such as creating behavior plans and things to address some anxiety-related issues or some anger frustrations. Some of the negative effects of labeling in the school setting are stigmatization, isolation from same-age non-exceptional peers, and then also reduced academic or behavioral expectations resulting from that implementation of the label. Analysis of those effects. Both effects of labels must be taken into account as supporting data to aid in the eligibility determination for special education. The negative effects are what we refer to as potentially harmful effects. And these must be disclosed to parents at every IEP Individualized Education Plan meeting. So the parent needs to be aware that there is the potential for stigmatization, isolation, things like that. The benefits of the IEP must outweigh the potentially harmful effects in order to justify the placement decision. In other words, the decision relies heavily on severity and to what degree the disability affects the student. So what that means is that just because a student has obtained either a medical diagnosis or a psychological diagnosis doesn't necessarily mean that it's hindering their daily life activities. So the school may not require a specific plan to meet this student's needs. When it does hinder a daily life activity, but not academic progress, then we would look at implementing a 504 plan just to provide some additional services for the student. This wouldn't be in the form of special education, but it would allow for, if a student has diabetes or something, it would allow for more frequent nurse visits, things like that, and that would be written into a plan. Now, when that disability adversely affects a student's progress within the general education curriculum, that's when we'd be looking at implementation of an IEP through special education. And this is my reference page. Thank you very much.